The Chicago theater was in a state of religious silence when Elena Carter stepped onto the stage. Her pointe shoes touched the wooden floor with that lightness only decades of training can create. Her white tutu floated around her body like clouds capturing light. But something was wrong. Everyone in the audience could feel it. The way she paused between movements, how her breathing seemed heavier than it should, how her hands trembled almost imperceptibly when raised above her head. In the front row, dance critic Robert Taylor frowned. Next to him, the artistic director of the Chicago Theater, Beatrice Foster, held the program so tightly her knuckles turned white. Eleanor was 32 years old and at the peak of her career, principal dancer of the Chicago Theater, invited to companies in Paris, New York, Moscow, compared to the legends, called the brightest ballerina of her generation by international critics. But that night, in that special performance of Giselle, something was clearly different. She completed the first act variation. The applause was polite, not enthusiastic. Murmurs began to spread through the audience. Is she sick? Has she lost her form? Is she having an off night? Backstage, artistic director Paul Miller held his head in his hands. Critics from 3 continents were in the audience. This was the night that would define the next phase of Elena's career. And she was clearly below expectations. When Elena left the stage at intermission, her legs almost gave way. Her dance partner, Richard Torres, held her by the arm. "Elena, what's going on?" he whispered urgently. "Do you need a doctor?" She shook her head, pushing him away. "I'm fine, I just need a minute." But she wasn't fine. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now, her vision blurred at the edges. And the headache that had been tormenting her for weeks was so intense that every beat of her heart felt like a hammer against her skull. Beatrice Foster entered the dressing room like a hurricane. "Elena, you need to tell me what's happening. Now. I can cancel the second act, say you're unwell." "No!" Eleanor's voice came out louder than she intended. "I won't cancel. Not tonight." "Then tell me what's wrong," Beatrice insisted, her voice mixing authority with genuine concern. Eleanor looked at her dressing room mirror. She saw her own reflection. Skin too pale, eyes with that feverish glint, hair in the perfect bun she had worn since she was 6 years old. 32 years of ballet, a whole life dedicated to that art. And now, "I have cancer," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. The silence that followed was absolute. Beatrice became completely still. Richard, who was still at the door, let out a strangled sound. Eleanor continued, her voice mechanical now as if reading from a script. "Glioblastoma, brain tumor, stage 4, inoperable. I found out 3 months ago. The doctors say I have between 4 and 6 months." The words fell in the dressing room like bombs. Beatrice sat down heavily in a chair. Richard covered his mouth with his hands. 3 months, Beatrice whispered. "You've known for 3 months and didn't say anything." Elena turned to her, and now there were tears streaming down her face, ruining the carefully applied makeup. "What was I supposed to say? Hello, I'm dying, but I still want to dance? You would have taken me off the stage. You would have put me on medical leave. You would have turned me into a patient before I could be a ballerina." Her voice broke completely. "Dance is all I have. It's all I am. If I can't dance, then I'm already dead." Richard approached, hugging her. Beatrice joined them, the 3 people crying together in that small dressing room, while the audience waited for the second act. It was then that Elena made a decision. She wiped her tears, quickly reapplied her makeup. She looked at Beatrice with fierce determination. "I'm going to finish this performance," she said. "And after, I'm calling a press conference. I'm going to tell the truth, all of it." Beatrice tried to argue that she should rest, seek second opinions, experimental treatments, but Elena was firm. "Beatrice, you don't understand. With each passing day, I lose a little more. My balance is already compromised. The tremors are worse, my vision, and sometimes I see double. If I wait another week, I might not be able to dance at all. So it's now, tonight, and every night I still can." The second act of Giselle is where the protagonist, already dead, returns as a spirit to save the man she loved. It is ethereal, supernatural, demanding a lightness that defies gravity. When Elena returned to the stage, something had changed. Not in her technique, which was visibly compromised, but in her presence. She danced like someone who knew that every movement could be the last. There was urgency in every arabesque, devotion in every pirouette. It wasn't technically perfect, but it was viscerally true. The audience felt it. Conversations ceased, critics stopped taking notes, everyone simply watched as Elena Carter transformed limitations into art. When she completed the final variation, a devastating solo where Giselle forgives her beloved and disappears at dawn, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The applause was deafening. It wasn't polite applause. It was a standing ovation that lasted 15 minutes. People were crying openly. Critics who had seen decades of performances knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, even without knowing exactly what. Eleanor took her bows, tears now flowing freely. When she finally left the stage, her legs gave way. Richard caught her before she fell. Beatrice was already organizing everything. She cancelled Elena's immediate commitments, called a press conference for the next morning, and discreetly called the best oncologist in Chicago, Dr. Frederick Simmons, begging him to come to the theater immediately. Dr. Simmons arrived an hour later. He found Elena in her dressing room, still wearing the Giselle costume, looking at her reflection. He was a man in his mid-50s with graying hair, kind but direct eyes. He examined her right there, asking clinical questions about symptoms, progression, attempted treatments. When he finished, his expression was grave. "Miss Carter, the doctors who diagnosed you were correct. Glioblastoma at your stage is terminal. There is no cure." Elena nodded. She already knew. She had made peace with it, as much as possible. "But," Dr. Simmons continued, "there are things we can do. Radiation to slow the growth, medications to control the symptoms, physical therapy to maintain mobility as long as possible. It won't save your life, but it could give you more time. Quality time." "How much time?" Elena asked, her voice just a whisper. The doctor hesitated. "With aggressive treatment, perhaps 8 to 10 months, maybe a year if we're lucky. And without treatment, 4 to 6 months, as your other doctors said." Elena processed the information. 8 to 10 months with treatment that would leave her weak, nauseous, unable to dance, or 4 to 6 months doing what she loved. "Is there any way," she asked carefully, "to control the symptoms without aggressive treatment? Something that would allow me to keep dancing?" Dr. Simmons looked at her with sad understanding. "You want to keep dancing?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "It's not wanting, it's needing." "Doctor, do you have something you love more than your own life? Something that defines who you are?" He thought of his daughter, who had died of leukemia at 7. He thought of how he spent every possible minute with her, not in hospitals, but creating memories. Parks, laughter, bedtime stories. "I understand," he said simply. "Yes. I can prescribe medications to control symptoms, steroids to reduce brain swelling, anticonvulsants, strong painkillers. It won't stop the progression, but it will help you function, for a while." "How long?" "Honestly, perhaps 3 months of relative functionality. After that, he didn't need to finish." Eleanor extended her hand. 3 months. 3 months of dance. I'll take it." The press conference the next morning was one of the most covered events in American cultural history. Journalists from all over the world called to ask if the rumors were true. Eleanor sat before dozens of cameras, microphones, eager reporters. Beatrice was by her side. Dr. Simmons was there too, at her request. She began in a calm but firm voice. "Thank you all for coming. I have an important announcement to make." The room fell into absolute silence. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with glioblastoma, an aggressive and terminal brain cancer. The doctors gave me between 4 and 6 months to live. The chaos that followed was immense. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, exclamations of shock. Beatrice had to repeatedly ask for order. Eleanor continued when the noise subsided. "I know this news is devastating. It was devastating for me too. But I've decided that I will not spend my last months in treatments that will leave me too weak to do what I love. Instead, I will dance." She paused, letting that settle. "I will dance every night my body allows. I will perform pieces I've always dreamed of. I will teach young dancers. I will live every remaining moment doing what I love. And I will do all of this publicly, because I want the world to see that even in the darkest moments we can still create beauty." A reporter raised his hand. "Miss Carter, do your doctors support this decision?" Dr. Simmons leaned into the microphone. "As an oncologist, my instinct is to recommend aggressive treatment. But as a human being who respects patient autonomy, I completely support Miss Carter's decision. She has chosen quality over quantity, and I will do everything in my power to ensure she has both for as long as possible." Another reporter, with tears in her eyes, asked, "What do you want people to remember about you?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "I don't want to be remembered as the ballerina who died young. I want to be remembered as the ballerina who lived completely, who didn't waste a single moment, who transformed tragedy into art." The press conference lasted 2 hours. When it finally ended, Elena was exhausted, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in months: lightness. The weight of the secret had been lifted. In the following days, the story exploded globally. Dance to the End became a worldwide trend. Millions of people shared Elena's story. Offers came from all over the world, choreographers wanting to create special pieces for her, theaters offering their stages, dancers wanting to perform with her. But there was also criticism. Some doctors argued publicly that she was being irresponsible, that she should seek aggressive treatment. Some dance critics said she was exploiting her illness for attention. Some religious figures claimed she was giving up instead of fighting. Elena read everything. The tears came, but so did the determination. A week after the press conference, she received a letter. It was from a 14-year-old girl named Julie, who had leukemia. "Dear Eleanor," the letter began in shaky handwriting. "I'm 14 years old and I've been fighting cancer for 2 years. I'm tired. The treatments make me so sick. Everyone tells me to be strong, to never give up, but sometimes I just want to rest." The letter continued. "When I saw your press conference, I cried. Not because you're dying, though that is very sad, but because you gave me permission to live my way, to choose what matters to me. You gave me the courage to tell my parents that I want to stop chemotherapy and just spend time with them. Quality time, not hospital time." Elena finished reading with tears streaming down her face. That letter crystallized everything. It wasn't about her. It was about giving people permission to live authentically, especially when time is limited. She replied to Julie personally, a gesture that began a correspondence that would change them both. 2 weeks after the announcement, Eleanor was in the rehearsal studios of the Chicago Theater when an unexpected visitor arrived. It was a woman in her 40s, dressed simply with a nervous expression. She introduced herself as Marina Sullivan, an independent choreographer from a small dance company in Milwaukee. "Miss Carter," Marina began, her hands twisting nervously, "I know you're being flooded with offers from famous choreographers, but I've come to ask for something different." Eleanor, curious, asked her to continue. Marina pulled a worn notebook from her bag. "My sister Camille died 5 years ago from pancreatic cancer. She was 28 and a dancer, just like you. When she found out she was dying, she asked me to create a piece for her. A piece about living completely, about not being afraid of death." Marina's voice broke. "But I couldn't. I was so afraid, so angry. The anger paralyzed me. Camille died before I could create that piece, and I live with that regret every day." She extended the notebook to Elena. "This is the notebook where I started choreographing that piece. I never finished it, but when I saw you, when I heard you speak, I felt that maybe it was time. Maybe you could dance what Camille never could." Eleanor opened the notebook. The pages were full of movement drawings, notes about emotions, suggested music excerpts. It was fragmented, incomplete, but there was something profoundly beautiful there. "You want me to dance this?" Eleanor asked. Marina shook her head, tears now flowing freely. "No, I want us to create this, together. You dance what I could never finish for Camille. And in the process, maybe we'll both find, I don't know, maybe peace, maybe meaning." Eleanor looked at those worn pages, marked by years of regret and unexpressed love. She looked at Marina, seeing in her not an unknown choreographer, but a kindred spirit in pain. "Yes," she said simply, "let's create this. If this story is moving you, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the final part of this incredible story." And so began an extraordinary partnership. Eleanor and Marina worked in the rehearsal studios for hours every day, creating a piece that was part tribute, part catharsis, part celebration of life in the face of inevitable death. But as the weeks passed, Eleanor began to feel the progression of the disease. Her headaches were more frequent. The tremors worsened. Her vision blurred earlier in the day. Movements that were second nature now required intense concentration. Dr. Simmons visited her weekly, adjusting medications, monitoring progression. He was honest about what he saw. The tumor is growing faster than we expected. Your 3 months of functionality might be only 2 months, 8 weeks, 56 days. Elena intensified her efforts. She worked with Marina in the morning, rehearsed with the company in the afternoon. At night, she wrote letters to Julie, journal entries, reflections on life and death and art. And every week she performed at the Chicago Theater. Each performance was different, sometimes technically imperfect but emotionally devastating. Always authentic, always urgent. The audiences changed in quality. They were no longer just dance lovers. They were people facing their own mortality. Cancer patients, grieving families, anyone seeking to understand how to live completely when time is short. 1 month after the announcement, Elena received a visit from someone she hadn't seen in 15 years. Her mother, Virginia Carter. They had become estranged when Elena was 17. A terrible fight about the future. Virginia wanted Elena to go to college, have a real career, a safe life. Elena just wanted to dance. They had said terrible things to each other. They hadn't spoken since. But now Virginia was in Elena's dressing room, aged but still recognizable, tears streaming down her face. "Elena," she whispered, "my girl." And Elena, who had spent 15 years building walls against this woman, broke down. She hugged her mother and cried like a child. They talked for hours that night. Virginia apologized for not supporting Elena's dream. Elena apologized for cruel words spoken in youthful anger. "You were right," Virginia finally said. "About dancing, about living your dream. I wasted 15 years being stubborn, and now we have time," Elena interrupted. "Not much, but some. Let's not waste it." Virginia started coming every night. She sat in the front row, watching her daughter dance. And after each performance they had dinner together, recovering lost years, creating new memories. But as the second month progressed, Elena's decline accelerated. She fell during rehearsal, lost consciousness briefly. Dr. Simmons took her to the hospital for tests. The tumor had grown significantly. It was pressing on critical areas of the brain. Time was running out faster than anyone had predicted. "Perhaps 2 weeks," Dr. Simmons said in a heavy voice. "Maybe 3 if we're lucky. After that the symptoms will be too much. You won't be able to dance anymore." Elena absorbed the information. 3 weeks, not 3 months, not even 2, 3 weeks. She turned to Marina, who was present. "How long do we need to finish the piece?" Marina calculated mentally. "If we work non-stop, perhaps 10 days. But Elena, you need to rest." "I don't have time to rest," Elena interrupted. "I have time to dance. So let's finish this." The next 10 days were the most intense of Elena's life. She and Marina worked 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Richard joined as her dance partner. Other company members offered help. The piece took shape. They called it Last Spring, a title that carried both hope and melancholy. It was about a woman who knew she would see her last spring and decided to live every moment as if it were eternal. It had 3 acts. The first represented denial, rigid, repetitive movements, stuck in safe patterns. The second was anger and bargaining, violent, chaotic movements, a fight against the inevitable. The third was acceptance, fluid, peaceful movements, a dance with death instead of against it. Marina had choreographed with brutal honesty. There were moments where Elena would literally fall, not by accident but on purpose, and would have to find beauty in getting back up. There were moments where other dancers would represent physical symptoms, surrounding her, limiting her, but she would dance through them. It was devastating, it was beautiful, it was true. On the 10th day, the piece was complete. They scheduled the premiere for 5 days later. It would be at the Chicago Theater, open to the public for free. Beatrice ensured cameras would film it for posterity and for those who couldn't attend in person. But in those 5 days of final rehearsals, Elena's body began to visibly fail. She fainted twice. Her hands trembled so much she could barely hold water. Her vision was so compromised that Richard had to physically guide her through some movements. Dr. Simmons begged her to cancel. "Elena, your body can't take it. You could have a seizure on stage. You could die on stage." Elena looked at him with that fierce determination he had learned to recognize. "Then I will die doing what I love. There are worse ways to go." The night before the premiere, Elena sat with her mother in the small apartment where they now lived together. Virginia had dropped everything to spend every remaining moment with her daughter. "Mom," Elena said, her voice weak but clear. "I need you to promise me something." Virginia held her daughter's hand. "Anything. Tomorrow, when I go on that stage, I don't want you to cry. I don't want tears of pity or sadness. I want you to watch, as you always watched when I was 6 years old and dancing in our apartment. With joy, with pride, with love." Virginia tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. She just nodded, tears already flowing. Elena continued, and now she was crying too. "And after, when I'm gone, no matter if it's tomorrow or next week, I want you to live, really live, travel, love. Do things you never did because you were afraid or being practical. Promise?" "I promise," Virginia whispered. "I promise, my girl." They spent that night talking. Elena told stories from her career she had never shared. Virginia told stories from Elena's childhood that she didn't remember. They laughed, they cried, they filled 15 years of silence with one night of connection. When the sun began to rise, Elena looked out the window. "My last spring," she murmured, "and it's beautiful." The Chicago theater was packed long before the doors opened. Thousands of people lined up outside. Free tickets sold out in minutes. Giant screens were installed in the surrounding streets for those who couldn't get in. Julie, the 14-year-old girl with leukemia who had written to Elena, was in the front row with her parents. Elena had insisted. Other cancer patients occupied entire sections, grieving families, people facing their own mortality. But there were also dance lovers from all over the world, critics from Paris, New York, Moscow, famous dancers who came to pay tribute, cameras from dozens of countries broadcasting live. Backstage, Elena was being prepared. The makeup artist, Sophia, cried as she applied foundation to Elena's pale face. The costume designer, Mark, adjusted the dress with trembling hands. Dr. Simmons was present, emergency medical equipment prepared. He checked Elena's vital signs. They were not good. Dangerously low blood pressure, irregular heartbeat. He told her she shouldn't do it, but Elena was already putting on her pointe shoes. Richard appeared, handsome in his costume but with red eyes from crying. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared that something will happen up there." Elena touched his face gently. "Richard, you've been my partner for 10 years. We've danced on 3 continents. We've created magic together. If something happens today, at least it will happen while we're doing what we've always done best." Marina appeared, her expression a mixture of maternal pride and pure terror. "The piece we started for Camille," she said, her voice trembling. "You're going to finish it for her. And for you. And for all of us." The 5-minute call sounded over the loudspeakers. Elena stood up and immediately felt dizzy. Richard held her. Beatrice entered the dressing room, her professional composure finally cracking. "Elena, there's still time to cancel. No one would judge you. No one would think—" "Beatrice," Elena interrupted gently, "you gave me my first chance in this theater when I was 19. Remember what you said? That every performance was an opportunity to touch souls. This is my last opportunity. I'm not going to waste it." When Elena walked to the side wings, the orchestra was already playing the overture. The audience was in absolute silence. The weight of anticipation was overwhelming. Virginia was in the front row, remembering her promise, not to cry, to watch with joy. Julie held her mother's hand, her own eyes shining with tears and admiration, and then the curtains opened. Elena entered the stage and the world stopped breathing. The first act began. Denial. Elena danced the rigid movements Marina had choreographed, repetitive steps, contained turns, a dancer trapped in safe patterns. But there was something hypnotic in the mechanical precision, in the beauty, even in the rigidity. 4 minutes into the first act, Elena stumbled. It wasn't in the script. It was a symptom. Her left leg simply didn't respond. The audience gasped collectively. Dr. Simmons was on his feet, ready to run onto the stage. But Elena didn't stop. She transformed the stumble into movement, fell gracefully, as if it had always been planned, and got up again, continued dancing. That moment, that recovery, said more than 1,000 words. It said, "I will fall, but I will get up. I will break, but I will continue." The first act ended with Elena on her knees at the center of the stage, hands covering her face. Denial doesn't work. The truth comes anyway. Blackout. When the lights came back for the second act, the orchestra exploded into violent, discordant music. Anger, bargaining, fight. Elena danced with a fury that surprised even those who had known her for decades. Every movement was a blow against an unjust fate. Every leap was an attempt to escape the body that betrayed her. Other dancers entered, representing symptoms, limitations, approaching death. They surrounded her, restricted her movements, limited her space. Elena fought against them, pushed, resisted, danced with every fiber of her remaining being. And then, at the climax of the second act, it happened. Elena was in the middle of a complex pirouette when her vision simply disappeared. Everything went black. She lost all spatial orientation completely. She fell hard, not gracefully this time. The music stopped. The audience stood up in panic. Dr. Simmons ran onto the stage, but before he reached her, Elena spoke. Her voice was amplified by the lapel microphones they all wore for breath sound capture. "No," she said, firm despite the pain. "Don't stop. Keep playing. Keep dancing." The orchestra hesitated. The conductor looked at Beatrice in the wings. She, tears streaming, nodded for them to continue. The music started again, and Eleanor, still on the floor, began to dance. She couldn't stand. Her vision came and went in waves, but she danced from the floor, arms moving with that liquid grace, torso undulating, head tilting. She was literally dancing while dying, and it was the most beautiful thing anyone in the audience had ever seen. The other dancers joined her, not as symptoms this time, but as support. They danced around her, creating frames for her floor movements. Richard knelt beside her, taking her hand, guiding her movements when she couldn't see. The second act ended with Elena being carried by the other dancers, not defeated, sustained, not alone, accompanied. The intermission was 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Backstage, Dr. Simmons examined Eleanor as she lay on an emergency couch. "Your blood pressure is critically low," he said. "You had a minor seizure. Elena, you can't continue. Your body is shutting down." Elena turned her head to look at him. Her vision had partially returned. "How long do I have, honestly?" Dr. Simmons hesitated, then decided on the truth. "Hours, maybe a day, no more than that." Elena absorbed that. Hours. What was an entire life measured in hours? "Then help me finish this," she said. "Give me what I need to get through the end of the third act. After it doesn't matter." The doctor looked at that extraordinary woman. He looked at her unshakable determination, and he made a decision that went against all his medical training. "Okay," he said, "I'll give you an injection of corticosteroids and stimulants. It will give you a burst of energy. But after I rest," Elena completed. "Forever." When the third act began, something miraculous had happened. The medication, the sheer force of will, something... Elena was standing again. The music of the third act was different. Not rigid like the first, not violent like the second. It was fluid, peaceful, beautiful in a way that broke the heart. Acceptance. Elena danced differently now. She didn't fight her body. She worked with it. When her legs trembled, she incorporated the tremors into the movements. When her vision blurred, she closed her eyes and danced by feel. It wasn't technically perfect. It was something more. It was vulnerability transformed into art. It was humanity in its purest form. Marina's choreography had planned a final solo where Elena would dance alone. But when that moment came, something extraordinary happened. Julie, the 14-year-old girl in the front row, stood up. She was crying but also smiling, and she began to dance in the aisle. It wasn't trained dance. It was just movement, expression. A girl with leukemia, weak from chemotherapy, dancing because Eleanor had given her permission to live authentically. Then another person stood up, a middle-aged woman who had lost her daughter to cancer. She too danced. Then another, and another. Within minutes, hundreds of people in the audience were on their feet, dancing. It wasn't chaos. It was communion, collective catharsis. On the giant screen outside, thousands also danced, and around the world, people watching the live broadcast stood up in their homes, hospitals, offices, and danced. Dance to the End became a global movement in that moment, not about ballet or technique, about living completely, about finding beauty even, especially when all seems lost. On stage, Elena saw this. She saw hundreds of people dancing with her, for themselves. And for the first time in months, she smiled with pure joy. She completed the final solo. The last movement was simple, arms rising to the sky, head tilting back, body arching like a flower opening to the sun. Elena executed that movement, and it was perfect. Then, gently, gracefully, she fell. Richard caught her before she hit the floor. The music stopped, the curtains closed, and the Chicago theater exploded into applause that lasted 23 minutes. People cried, shouted, clapped until their hands hurt. Backstage, Dr. Simmons was already working. Eleanor had lost consciousness. Her vital signs were critical. Virginia ran backstage, pushing past security guards who tried to stop her. She knelt beside her daughter, holding her hand. "Elena," she whispered, "my girl, you did it. You danced your last spring." Elena's eyes opened briefly. They focused on her mother's face. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Marina was crying uncontrollably. "Camille saw," she said. "Wherever she is, she saw. And she's proud. They both are." Richard held Elena's other hand. Beatrice was there too, her composure completely broken. Dr. Simmons checked the monitors and shook his head sadly at Virginia. There was nothing more he could do. It was a matter of minutes. But then Elena spoke. Her voice was just a whisper, but everyone leaned in to hear. "It was worth it," she said. "Every moment, every sacrifice, every pain, it was worth it to be able to dance. If this story is moving you, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell because every week there is a new story." Virginia kissed her daughter's forehead. "Rest now, my love. You danced beautifully. So beautifully." Elena's eyes closed. Her breathing became irregular. And then, surrounded by people she loved, doing what she loved, Elena Carter passed away. The silence that fell over the backstage was sacred. Dr. Simmons officially recorded the time, 23 hours and 42 minutes. On the other side of the curtains, the audience was still applauding, unaware that the ballerina they had just witnessed dance was no longer with them. Beatrice made a decision. She asked for the curtains to be opened one last time. When the curtains opened, the audience saw the entire company on stage, on their knees, heads bowed. Elena's point shoes placed at the center of the stage, illuminated by a single spotlight. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, understanding spread. She was gone. The weeping that echoed through the Chicago theater that night was different from any other. It wasn't just sadness. It was gratitude. It was recognition of having witnessed something transcendent. Julie, still in the front row, wasn't crying. She was smiling through the tears, because Elena had given her the most precious gift, permission to live authentically, no matter how much time remained. In the following days, the world mourned. Obituaries in every major newspaper. Tributes from legendary dancers. World leaders expressing condolences. But more significant were the personal stories. Thousands of people sharing how Elena had inspired them. Cancer patients deciding to live on their own terms. Grieving people finding strength to continue. Artists remembering why they created. The funeral was held a week later. Virginia insisted it be a celebration, not a lament. The Chicago Theater Orchestra played. Dancers performed short pieces. People shared stories. Marina read a letter that Camille had written before she died, a letter she had never had the courage to open until now. "My dear sister," the letter said, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And I know you're angry, you're sad, you're lost. But please, don't let my death be the end of beauty. Create, dance, live. Because every moment you create something beautiful in my memory, I'm not really dead." Marina finished reading, looked at Elena's coffin decorated with white roses and whispered, "You finished the piece, Elena, for Camille, for you, for all of us. Thank you." Richard shared the last conversation he had with Eleanor, days before the final performance. She had said, "I don't want you to remember me as I was in the last months. I want you to remember me on stage, flying, free, because that's when I was most myself." Dr. Simmons surprisingly also spoke. He admitted he had treated thousands of terminal patients in his career, but Elena taught him something no medical book could, that quality of life isn't measured in vital signs, but in moments of meaning. "She chose 2 months of full life over 6 months of diminished existence," he said, "and in the process, she touched more lives than most of us would in 100 years. Julie read a poem she had written. It was about ballerinas and sick girls, about dancing with death instead of against it, about finding beauty in unexpected places. When she finished, she looked at her parents and said something that left them speechless. "I'm going back to treatment. Not because I'm afraid of dying, but because I want to live. Really live, as Elena showed. And for that, I need time." It was what Elena would have wanted. Not giving up treatment, but conscious choice, self-determination. The last person to speak was Virginia. She climbed the podium with a yellowed envelope. "Eleanor gave me this 3 days before her last performance," Virginia began, voice trembling. "She told me to open it only at her funeral, and now I understand why." She opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, it means I've danced my last dance, and I hope so much that it was beautiful. I want you to know something. Those 15 years we didn't speak. For a long time I thought of them as waste. Lost years we would never recover. But now I realize they weren't lost. They were necessary. Because when we finally reconnected, there was no more anger, no more resentment, just pure love. Those last months with you were the most precious of my life, not because of the cancer, but because we were finally mother and daughter without barriers. So don't mourn the lost time. Celebrate the time we had. Celebrate that we found each other again before it was too late. And please, please remember your promise. Live, love. Dance not literally, because I know you have 2 left feet, but dance through life. Find joy, find purpose. My death is not a tragedy. The tragedy would be to live without really living. And that, Mom, I never did. I danced, I loved, I lived completely until my last breath. When you miss me, and I know you will, close your eyes and imagine me on stage. Not sick, not suffering, but flying, because that's how I want to be remembered. I love you more than words can express. You're Elena, always dancing. There wasn't a dry eye at the funeral, but there were also smiles, because Elena was right. She lived completely, and in the process, taught others to do the same. 5 years after Elena's death, Virginia was organizing the apartment she had shared with her daughter in the last months of her life. She had put this off for too long. Every object was a memory. Every corner held Eleanor's presence. But the time had come, not to forget, but to transform that space into something new. Virginia had decided to convert the apartment into a residence for young dancers without resources, exactly what Elena would have wanted. While emptying the closet, she found something unexpected. A shoebox hidden in the back, behind dozens of worn point shoes. Inside were notebooks. Many notebooks. Virginia opened the first one with trembling hands. It was Elena's diary, but it didn't start in the last months. It started 15 years ago, right after the fight that had separated them. Virginia read the first entry, dated 3 days after her last conversation with Elena. "Mom doesn't understand. Or maybe I don't understand. She wants security for me. But security without passion is just slow existence. I choose to dance, I choose to live, even if it means losing her for a while, because I know, deep in my heart, that someday we will find each other again. And when that happens, it will be like magic." Virginia cried, reading that. Elena had always known they would reconnect. Even in the worst moments of separation, she had kept the faith. She kept reading. Years of entries. Triumphs on stage. Romantic disappointments, deep friendships. Moments of doubt. Moments of absolute certainty. And then, 3 years before her death, the first mention of symptoms. The headaches are worse. But everyone gets headaches, right? It's the stress. The pressure. Nothing more. I can't stop now. Not when I'm so close to everything I dreamed of. Virginia read with a heavy heart as the entries documented the progression of symptoms that Elena ignored, denied, rationalized. For a full year before the official diagnosis, there were signs. Why hadn't Elena sought help sooner? The answer came in an entry from 2 years before her death. "I know something is wrong. I know I should probably see a doctor, but I'm so afraid. Afraid of what they'll find. Afraid they'll tell me to stop dancing. And if I have to choose between living longer without dancing or living less time doing what I love, I already know my answer." Virginia closed the notebook, hugging it to her chest. Eleanor had known. Perhaps not consciously, but at some deep level she had always known that time was limited, and she had chosen to dance. But there were more notebooks. Virginia opened the next one. It was different. It wasn't a diary. It was letters. Dozens of unsent letters, each addressed to a different person. The first was to Richard. "Dear Richard, If you're reading this, I've already danced my last dance, and I hope you were by my side, as you always were. I want you to know something I never had the courage to say out loud. You were more than a dance partner. You were my best friend, my confidant, my anchor when the world spun too fast. Every pirouette I completed was because I trusted you would catch me. Every leap I risked was because I knew you were there. You made me a better dancer, but more importantly, you made me a better person. Keep dancing, Richard. Not for me, but for you. You have so much beauty inside you. Don't let my death extinguish your light. And when you create your own choreography, because I know you will, because I've seen the way your eyes shine when you imagine new movements, make it about joy, not about loss, because life, even when short, should be a celebration. With all my love, Elena. Virginia found a letter for Marina. Dear Marina, thank you. Thank you for having the courage to come back, for creating the piece your sister asked for letting me be part of that healing journey. Last spring wasn't just my last performance, it was redemption for you. It was Camille saying, "It's okay, you can keep creating, you can keep living. I have a request. Keep choreographing. Keep creating beauty from pain." There are so many Camilles and Elenas in the world, people whose stories need to be told through movement, through art, through truth. You have a rare gift. You transform tragedy into transcendence. Don't waste it. And know, wherever Camille is, she is proud of you. So proud. Always dancing, Elena. There were letters for Beatrice, for Dr. Simmons, for company members. And then Virginia found one that made her stop completely. It was addressed to Julie, the 14-year-old girl with leukemia. My dear Julie, you're probably confused about why I left a letter for you. After all, we met so briefly, but you changed my life in ways you can't imagine. When I received your first letter, when I read about your tiredness, your doubt, your fear, I saw a reflection of myself, and I realized that my journey wasn't just about me. It was about giving permission. Permission to be tired. Permission to choose quality over quantity. Permission to live authentically even when, especially when, time is limited. You gave me purpose in my last months. Every letter from you reminded me why I was doing what I was doing. It wasn't just about dancing. It was about showing that there is more than one way to be brave. So thank you, Julie. Thank you for your courage in writing to me. Thank you for your honesty about your struggles. Thank you for letting me be part of your journey. And now, my final request, live. No matter how much time you have, 5 years, 50 years, 80 years, live every moment with intention. Love deeply. Create freely. Dance always, even if only in your heart. Your friend, always, Elena P.S. My mother, Virginia, has something for you. Ask her when you're ready. Virginia looked at the envelope. There was something else inside. She took it out. It was a will. Elena had left specific instructions. Half of her estate, which wasn't much, dancers rarely die rich, was to go to establishing a scholarship fund, but the other half had a specific destination, to pay for Julie's medical treatment. Virginia cried. Her daughter, even in her final moments, was thinking of others. She picked up the phone and called Julie's parents. It was time to fulfill Elena's last wish. 3 days later, Virginia visited Julie in the hospital where the girl was undergoing maintenance treatment. Now 19 years old, Julie was in remission but still needed regular monitoring. Virginia handed her the envelope with the letter and the will. Julie read it with tears streaming. When she got to the part about the money, she shook her head. I can't accept this. Elena barely knew me. Elena knew you better than you think, Virginia interrupted gently. And she wanted to do this. Honor her by accepting. Use that money not just for treatment, but to live. To do things you've always dreamed of. Julie hugged Virginia, both crying. And in that moment, something changed in Julie. She did something she had been putting off for years. Virginia, she said, wiping tears, there's something I want to do, something Elena inspired, but I'm going to need help. Julie revealed that she wanted to create a documentary, not specifically about Elena, but about the movement she had started, about terminal patients who chose quality of life, about families who found peace, about how a life lived authentically can inspire thousands. Virginia loved the idea. More than that, she committed to helping. They would start filming immediately. In the following months, Julie and Virginia traveled throughout the US and then internationally, interviewing people touched by Elena's story. They met Carlos, a 45-year-old man with ALS, who chose to spend his last month sailing instead of in a hospital. He told how watching last spring gave him the courage to make that choice. They met Patricia, a mother who lost her 10-year-old son to a brain tumor. She told how Elena's philosophy about living completely changed the last 3 months of her son's life. Less time in the hospital, more time at the beach, building memories. They met David, a dancer from New York, who saw Elena's performance broadcast live and decided to come out to his family, knowing life is too short to live a lie. Each story was different, but they all shared a central theme. Elena had given them permission to live authentically. The documentary took 2 years to complete. Julie, now a medical student, worked on it at nights and on weekends. Virginia, who discovered a talent for storytelling, helped shape the stories. When Dance to the End, The Legacy of Elena Carter premiered, it became a cultural sensation. It won awards at film festivals. It was shown in medical schools, hospitals, palliative care conferences. But more importantly, it inspired a new wave of conversations about death, choice, and dignity. On the night of the premiere, the Chicago Theatre organized a special screening. Everyone was there: Richard, Marina, Beatrice, Dr. Simmons. And surprisingly, dozens of people who appeared in the documentary, people whose lives were changed by Eleanor. When the lights came on after the film, there were no adequate words. Julie took the stage, now a confident young woman with a clear purpose. Eleanor told me in a letter, Julie began, her voice clear and strong, that she didn't want to be remembered as the ballerina who died young. She wanted to be remembered as the ballerina who lived completely. She looked at the audience. Today, 5 years after her death, I can say, mission accomplished. Elena is not remembered for her death. She is remembered for her life, for her courage, for her authenticity, for teaching us that living completely doesn't require longevity. It requires intention. Richard stood up from the audience. He had something to announce. He had spent the last few years creating a new piece, his first complete choreography, and it was ready to premiere. It was called Echoes of Spring. It was about how one life, even when short, creates waves that continue long after the person is gone. The premiere would be in 1 month, and Richard wanted Julie to dance the lead role. Julie looked shocked. "But I'm not a dancer. I've never trained." "Elena didn't dance technically perfectly in her last performance," Richard interrupted. "She danced truthfully, and that's what I need. Someone who understands what this piece means, someone who has lived it." Julie accepted, and during the following 4 weeks she worked with Richard intensively, not learning classical technique, there was no time for that, but learning to translate emotion into movement. The night of the premiere, Julie was terrified, not in the dressing room of the Chicago Theatre, but on the very stage where Elena had given her last performance. She wore a simple white dress, reminiscent of what Elena had worn, but that was coincidence. It was about purity, vulnerability, truth. The music began, and Julie danced. It wasn't technically perfect. Her movements were hesitant at times, not as fluid as a trained dancer's, but there was something intensely real about it. She danced her own journey. Diagnosis, fear, treatment, pain, but also hope, connection with Elena through letters, decision to live, remission, purpose, found. And then, at the climax of the piece, other dancers entered. They represented all the people touched by Elena. Each danced their own brief solo, Carlos on his boat, Patricia with her son, David coming out. It was like a tapestry of interconnected lives. And at the center, Julie, representing both herself and Elena, connecting them all. The piece ended with Julie standing at the center, arms raised to the sky exactly as Eleanor had done. But this time, she didn't fall. She remained standing. Because life continues. Legacy continues. Love continues. The ovation was deafening, but the most powerful moment came after. Virginia climbed onto the stage. She was now 65 years old, hair completely white, but eyes shining with renewed purpose. She announced the creation of an institute, the Eleanor Carter Institute for Authentic Living. Its purpose, to support people with terminal illnesses who chose quality over quantity, helping them fulfill final dreams, create legacies, live completely. The initial funding came from an unexpected source. The recording of Elena's last performance had been released as a film. All profits went to the Institute. In the following years, the Institute helped hundreds. A writer with lung cancer, who wanted to finish his last novel, a grandmother with Alzheimer's who wanted to record stories for her grandchildren before she forgot, a musician with terminal heart disease who wanted to give one last concert. Each person received resources to realize their final dream. Not miracle cures, the Institute was honest about that, but opportunities to create meaning. Marina became the Institute's artistic director, creating specific pieces for patients who found expression through dance. Richard led workshops. Dr. Simmons provided free medical consultation. 10 years after Elena's death, Julie completed her medical residency. She specialized in palliative care, an area that didn't even exist robustly in the US before. Her first patient as a full-fledged doctor was a 12-year-old girl with an inoperable brain tumor. The parents wanted aggressive treatment. The girl just wanted to go to Disney World. Julie sat down with the family and told them Eleanor's story, not to convince them of anything, but to open a conversation about what really mattered. Treatment could give 3 more months, she explained honestly, but they would be 3 months of nausea, weakness, hospitalization, or you could have 2 months of quality. Memories, joy, choice. The family chose Disney World. The girl spent 6 magical weeks with her family, having every experience she had dreamed of. She died 3 days after returning, but she died happy, complete, loved. The parents later sought out Julie, crying, but also thanking her. "You gave us the greatest gift," they said. "Quality time with our daughter, memories that will last forever." This became the pattern of Julie's practice. Always honest, always compassionate, always centered on what the patient truly wanted. 15 years after Elena's death, the Yo's Dance to the End movement had transformed palliative care globally. Hospitals around the world adopted models that prioritized quality of life. Medical schools taught patient autonomy as a central principle. And it all started with a ballerina who decided to dance to the end. Marina, now 58, created her final masterpiece. It was a retrospective of 20 years since last spring, including scenes from Elena's original performance, interwoven with new solos by dancers inspired by her. She called it Eternal Echoes, and the premiere was scheduled for the 20th anniversary of Elena's death. The Chicago theater was packed as it had been on that transformative night 2 decades earlier. But now, in the front row, was Julie, Dr. Julie Santos, an internationally recognized specialist in palliative care. Next to her were Carlos, surprisingly still alive, defying all prognoses, Patricia, David, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched. Virginia was there too. Now 70 years old, she had kept every promise she made to her daughter. She had traveled the world, loved again. A gentle widower she met in Paris, lived completely. The performance began with a projection. It was Eleanor, young and radiant, dancing Giselle at the beginning of her career. Perfect technique, immaculate beauty, but somehow less impactful than her final imperfect performance. Then it changed to scenes from last spring. Elena stumbling but continuing, falling but dancing from the floor, her final arabesque, her final gesture of hands to the sky. There wasn't a dry eye in the theater. But then came the new part. Contemporary dancers, many born after Elena's death, dancing interpretations of what she meant to them. A solo about courage, another about vulnerability, a third about legacy. And finally, a surprise Marina had kept secret. Julie danced. At 34 years old, with no formal training beyond those weeks with Richard years ago, Julie took the stage and danced. It was simple. It was honest. It was about gratitude. She danced about a 14-year-old girl with leukemia who found hope in a dying ballerina, about a young doctor who turned that hope into a mission, about a legacy that continues through every life saved, every moment of quality provided, every family that found peace. When she finished, Virginia was on her feet, applauding. Soon the entire audience joined in. After the performance, there was a reception. People shared stories, many meeting for the first time despite all being connected by Elena. That's when something magical happened. Someone started playing music, and spontaneously, people began to dance. Not formal performance. Just movement, joy, life. Virginia danced with her husband. Julie danced with Richard. Marina danced alone, tears of joy streaming, finally completely at peace with the loss of Camille. And throughout the room, in every corner, people danced. young and old, healthy and sick, trained dancers and clumsy amateurs, everyone dancing because Elena had taught them. Live completely, love deeply, dance always. 25 years after Elena's death, Virginia, now 75 years old, was lying in a hospital bed. Ovarian cancer, advanced, terminal. But she wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. She was at peace. Julie, her doctor and dear friend, sat by her side. "You know we have options," Julie said gently. "Chemotherapy could give 3 more months of feeling sick," Virginia completed, smiling. "No, my dear. I learned from my daughter. Quality over quantity." Julie smiled through her tears. "Then what do you want to do with the time you have?" Virginia thought. Then she smiled in a way that lit up the entire room. "I want to dance." And so, in that hospital room, Julie played music on her phone. Last spring, the recording of Elena's final performance. Virginia closed her eyes, listening, and although her body was weak, her spirit danced. She saw Elena, young, beautiful, free, flying across the stage. "I'm coming, my girl," she whispered. "I kept all my promises. I lived completely, as you taught me." Virginia Carter passed away 3 days later, with Julie by her side, ballet music playing softly, a peaceful smile on her face. Her funeral was a celebration, exactly as she had requested. Dancers performed, stories were shared, and at the end everyone danced. She was buried next to Eleanor. Buried. Their headstones were simple but profound. Eleanor Carter, 1992-2024, danced to the end and taught the world to do the same. Virginia Carter, 1954-2049, kept every promise and danced through life. 30 years after Elena's death, Julie, now 44 years old and director of the Elena Carter Institute, received an unexpected visit. It was a 16-year-old girl named Sophia. She had cancer, and she had a request. "Dr. Santos," Sophia said nervously, "I learned about Elena Carter in school. I saw the documentary you made, and I want to do the same. I want to live my last months doing what I love." Julie sat down, already feeling tears. "And what do you love, Sophia?" "Music," Sophia replied, eyes shining. "I play the violin, and I want to give a final concert. I want to play as Elena danced, completely, without fear." Julie hugged the girl, and in that moment she understood that Eleanor's legacy was truly eternal, not because she was famous, but because she taught something universal, how to live authentically, even, especially when time is limited. Sophia's concert was 3 months later. The Chicago Theater, of course. Where else would it be? She played with a passion that transcended technique. And when she finished, she didn't die on stage as some feared. She continued living for 2 more months, making music, creating joy, living completely. When she finally passed, it was in peace. And she left a recording of her concert, asking that it be used to inspire other young musicians to play with heart, not just precision. The cycle continued. 50 years after Elena Carter's death, the world was a different place. Palliative care was the standard, not the exception. Patient autonomy was a globally recognized right. Conversations about death and quality of life were normalized, not taboo. And it could all be traced back to a ballerina who, half a century ago, decided to dance instead of wasting away. Julie, now 64 years old and nearing retirement, gave her last lecture at an international medical conference. She climbed the podium, hair now grey but eyes still shining with passion. 50 years ago, she began, a 32-year-old ballerina received a terminal diagnosis. Doctors gave her 6 months. She chose 2 months of dance over 6 months of treatment. The room was silent. Many said she was giving up, being irresponsible, wasting precious time. But Elena Carter understood something that medicine is only beginning to accept, that living isn't just breathing, it's meaning, it's purpose, it's authenticity. Julie paused, letting that settle. In those 2 months, she touched millions of lives, started a movement that changed how we deal with death, inspired changes in medical policies globally, and more importantly, gave countless people permission to live on their own terms. She smiled, tears in her eyes. So when your next patient chooses quality over quantity, when they choose Disney World over chemotherapy, when they choose to dance instead of treatment, don't judge them. Celebrate, because they are exercising a fundamental human right. to live authentically. The ovation lasted 10 minutes. After the lecture, a young doctor approached. "Dr. Santos, I lost my sister to cancer when I was 10, she was 12, and in those last months it was all hospital, treatment, pain. We never had just time." He was crying now. If we had known Elena's story, maybe we would have done things differently. Maybe we would have had memories instead of just trauma. Julie hugged him. "That's why we keep telling the story, so that every family has a choice, so that every patient knows there is more than one way to be brave." That night, Julie visited the graves of Elena and Virginia. She brought fresh flowers as she had done every week for decades. She sat on the grass, looking at the headstones illuminated by the soft light of dusk. "So, Elena," she said aloud, "you were right about everything. 2 months of living completely were worth more than years of just existing. You proved that, and changed the world in the process." She paused, wiping tears. "I was lucky I went into remission. I lived to have a career, a family, purpose, but I never forgot your lessons. Every day I live intentionally. I love deeply. And yes, I still sometimes dance. Terribly, but I dance." The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. "Thank you," Julie whispered. "Thank you for saving me when I was 14 and didn't want to fight anymore. Thank you for showing me that living authentically is worth any price. Thank you for your legacy that continues saving lives decades later." A gentle breeze moved the nearby trees, and for a moment, Julie could have sworn she heard music, the music of last spring. She closed her eyes and danced, not a performance, just movement, gratitude expressed through her body. And if anyone was watching, and dozens were other cemetery visitors, they would see a 64-year-old woman dancing among headstones at sunset, celebrating life, even in a place of death. Because Elena taught that death is not the opposite of life. Apathy is, fear is, living inauthentically is, but dancing, metaphorically or literally, is choosing life, every day, every moment. 100 years after Elena Carter's birth, the Chicago Theater organized a centennial celebration. None of the main players were still alive. Julie had passed away at 82 after a long and meaningful life, Richard at 79, Marina at 90. But their legacies continued, and more importantly, Elena's legacy continued. The celebration included a retrospective of a century of change in medical care, patient autonomy, and conversations about death. Historians traced a direct line from last spring through decades of reforms. They presented Last Spring again, the choreography meticulously preserved, danced by a new company. And although it was technically perfect in ways Elena never was, it lacked something. It lacked urgency. It lacked vulnerability. It lacked the visceral truth of knowing that every movement could be the last. But it didn't matter, because the message remained, and the message was simple. Live completely. Love deeply. Dance always. On the last day of the celebration, they did something special. They broadcast Elena's final performance globally, remastered in modern quality. Billions watched, and around the world, people of all ages, all cultures, all backgrounds, stood up and danced. Not because they were dancers, but because they were human. And Elena reminded them that being human is choosing life, every day, against all odds. The broadcast ended with the last words Elena had spoken before dying, words that Dr. Simmons had recorded, and that had become a global mantra. It was worth it, every moment, every sacrifice, every pain. It was worth it to be able to dance. And then, the same thing that had happened 50 years before repeated itself. For 3 minutes, the entire world danced together. In hospitals, patients danced from their beds. In homes, families danced together. In streets, strangers danced side by side. For 3 minutes, all of humanity remembered. We are not defined by how long we live, but by how completely we live. And somewhere, on some plane beyond comprehension, Elena Carter was dancing too. Free from pain, free from limitations, free, eternally dancing, eternally inspiring, eternally reminding the world, dance to the end. And the end will be just the beginning. If you were moved by this story, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell because every week there is a new story. And leave in the comments which moment marked you the most in this story. Was it when Elena danced for the last time? When Julie decided to live? Or when you realized that legacy goes beyond death? We read all the comments. Remember, this story is about more than a ballerina with cancer. It's about all of us. About choosing to live intentionally instead of just existing. About finding the courage to be authentic, even when the world pressures us to be practical. About creating legacies that go beyond our last breath. Eleanor was 32 years old and had 2 months. But in those 2 months, she lived more completely than many live in 80 years. Not because she was special or extraordinary from birth, but because she chose, consciously, courageously, to transform tragedy into transcendence. Each of us faces our own mortality, some sooner, others later. But we all eventually reach that moment where time stops being infinite and becomes countable. The question Elena leaves us with is, what do we do with that time? Do we waste it on things that don't matter? On jobs we hate? On relationships that diminish us? On fears that paralyze us? Or do we choose to dance, not literally necessarily, but metaphorically? We choose to live with passion, to love without reservation, to create without fear of judgment, to connect deeply, to forgive completely. Eleanor danced. You can paint, write, build, teach, care, explore. What matters is not the form but the intention, to live completely until your last moment. Wherever you are now, whether at the peak of health or facing your own battle, know this. You have a choice. You always have a choice. You can choose fear or courage. You can choose apathy or passion. You can choose to exist or to live. Elena chose to live, and in doing so, she taught millions to do the same. Her legacy is not just in the history books of ballet. It is in every patient who exercises autonomy over their own journey, in every family that chooses quality over quantity, in every person who decides today to stop postponing dreams. It is in Julie, who turned inspiration into a life-saving career, in Virginia, who found the courage to live fully after decades of playing it safe, in Richard, Marina, Beatrice, all transformed by witnessing radical courage. And it is in you. If this story touched something in your heart, if it made you question how you are living, if it planted a seed of change, then Elena continues to dance through you.